is through my podcast on any podcast platform, Max Van Auken. My name is my brand, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. Like I said, YouTube, Max Van Auken, I'm on it. This episode in particular is a combat sports episode. We have the NFL season coming up. The NBA season's a wrap. The Summer League is a wrap. So this is a combat sports episode because it's not just MMA. It's not just boxing. Combat sports. And I want to touch on something a little specific. I want to touch on something specific. A lot of people don't like Jake Paul and Logan Paul. I've covered a UFC event in Jacksonville. And as soon as Jake Paul entered the building, tons of boos, F Jake Paul, and he embraced it. And it made me realize something. This guy's a lot smarter than we give him credit for. He's a lot smarter than we give him credit for. And Jake Paul is about to fight Tyron Woodley, and it's coming up here very shortly. And I know we're going to talk about it, and I know it's going to get tons of criticism. I know it's going to get tons of hate. And that's why I want to touch on this. And I want to touch on this because Jake Paul is incredibly smart and deserves his flowers. I said it. He deserves his flowers. He may come off ignorant and cocky and disrespectful, and he's hurting boxing, and a lot of the traditionalists and boxing purists don't like it and how it's hurting the sport, and Canelo would destroy him and Floyd would destroy him. And you're not seeing through all of that. From a business perspective, let's just take it worldwide. Everything in life progresses and evolves over time, right? Athletes get better, medicine gets better, technology gets better, and things change. The way we consume information change. I mean, a lot of people don't even, I love the movies, but a lot of people aren't even going to the movies anymore. You're streaming, you got HBO Max, you have Disney Plus, you have Netflix, you have Hulu, cable. Now people are going to podcasts and streaming, and so you have to evolve with the times. It's a new wave, and it's always going to do that. So you can't get stuck in one regiment and one way of doing things, or else you'll get left behind. That's just the way it is. You have to be able to adapt. We live in a fast food society right now where everything we want right now. Jake Paul and Logan Paul have created a loyal following, and they've been able to take their following no matter what platform, no matter what avenue they're going to. And they're incredibly smart, and we're not giving them the credit that they deserve. Because you're saying that they're hurting boxing and that they don't deserve these fights. Why don't they deserve these fights? They've understood how to promote themselves. They've understood how to put themselves in positions to where they can now use their platform to not only generate money for themselves, but now they're putting the spotlight on topics they want to get talked about. To me, that's incredibly intelligent because they're utilizing the way we consume information now, what we do, and they're utilizing it in their favor. To me, that's incredibly smart. This is the part that's a lot of people are not going to like. They are helping boxing. And I'm going to say that again. Jake Paul and Logan Paul are helping boxing. And why is that? Is it because of their value, their skill set? No. And that's why I think a lot of people aren't realizing. They're helping boxing because boxing is one of the oldest sports in U.S. history. It's one of the oldest sports in history. I mean, really, if you want to go way back, combat sports is just the oldest sport in general. Back in the Coliseum days. But what they're able to do is they're able to take an old traditional sport, right, that's been around forever, boxing, and they're implementing a new way of doing things. And so that's conflicting, it's contrasting, and it's not supposed to work, and it's not good, and it's hurting it, it's tearing down. It's not. In all reality, what Jake Paul and Logan Paul are doing is they're bringing the new wave of the new era information, the way we process things, and they're combining it with a traditional sport. And that's where the contrast is coming in, and that's actually where they're helping boxing. UFC has surpassed boxing nowadays. Why? Because of Dana White and his way of thinking. He's aggressive, and it's all under one umbrella. And that's why we look at UFC as one. When people say, they don't even say MMA, you say UFC, and you immediately think of MMA. Boxing, there's so many different titles, so many different companies, so many different managers. So what I'm saying is you're taking a traditional sport in boxing that's been around forever, and Jake Paul and Logan Paul, I'm not saying they're the best boxers, but they're incredibly smart because they're taking the new way of information and they're combining it with a traditional sport. And that's actually going to help boxing. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but Jake Paul and Logan Paul are helping boxing because of the new way that they do things the new era, the new generation through streaming and YouTube, and they're taking their following and they're bringing it to a traditional sport that needs to evolve. And that's honestly why boxing has struggled. It's never evolved. It's been stuck in one way of doing things. And so when you take a disruptor and you bring it to a traditional type of element, that traditional element has no choice but to evolve. Now, I'm not saying they're the most skilled boxers. I'm not saying that they're the elite of the elite. But what they're doing is they're forcing boxing to evolve. And that is ultimately good for boxing. Now, they're not the Canelos. They're not the Tyson Furies. They're not the Mayweathers. I'm not saying that. But they are obviously taking the sport seriously. They are putting in the work. They are training. But what they're doing for boxing is forcing boxing to evolve. And I ultimately think that's great. Because UFC evolved. UFC is constantly evolving. UFC is aggressive. Boxing isn't. And that's why it fell off for such a period of time. And we love the Tyson Fury fights. We love the Deontay Wilder fights. But they're not under one umbrella, and they never evolved. And they got left behind. And what Jake Paul and Logan Paul are doing is bringing that new ideas and that new element and the super fight or the money fight, the platform. And that's what we needed. We needed excitement to a non-evolved sport. And that's happening. That's why people sometimes push back at Tiger Woods, and they push back at because he's a disruptor. And golf is such a traditional sport, and things need to be done one way. And Tiger Woods was in shape, and he fist pumped, and he cursed, and he showed emotion, and that's not what we're used to do with golf. We don't usually think of golf and think of that. It's supposed to be traditional and respect and this. And it was so suit and tie with what we expect. But Tiger Woods was bigger than golf itself. So he helped golf. Jake Paul and Logan Paul are not a Tiger Woods type talent, but they are bringing that new concept to boxing. And that is why UFC has skipped over boxing, because of not only the entertainment value, but like I said, their growth, their constant development, their evolution, they're being aggressive, they try new things, and it's all under one umbrella. And so ultimately, when I look at this Jake Paul and I look at this Tyron Woodley fight, I'm not even thinking about the actual individual fight, if that makes sense. I'm thinking about what Jake Paul brings to a traditional sport, and that's what I'm a fan of. He may lose and we never see him fight again. But what he's been able to do is create a shock value to something that's been standing still and forcing it to be uncomfortable. And I think that's important. And I thought it's brought eyes, it's brought attention, it's created a conversation, and I think that's always a good thing, depending on how you respond to that. Don't react, respond to that. This fight is interesting, though. Don't get me wrong. I do want to talk about the fight as well. But on the grand scheme of things, the macro level of things, I'm very intrigued with what this means to boxing. But when you look at the individual fight, so we'll dive into that. Tyron Woodley versus Jake Paul, there's some things that you need to know. And Tyron Woodley is a former UFC welterweight champion. In his peak, he was one of the best champions. Now, he's not the greatest of all time. He's not top 10 all time. He's not the greatest welterweight of all time. That's George St. Pierre. And the number 2 looks like it's Usman. 3 would be Matt Hughes. 4 is probably Tyron Woodley. He's in his 40s. He is out of his prime. He was never just like a striker. He was a powerful wrestler with a right hand who never... He's not a pure boxer now. His original passion was boxing. But obviously he thrived and excelled in MMA. But he's a tremendous athlete. But like I said, he definitely is on the back nine of his career. He suffered a lot of losses recently. But he hasn't had the platform or the paycheck that he's about to get with this fight. And I think that adds a fuel, that adds a fire to an older fighter. Hey, I'm about to make more money than ever, and I'm about to box, something I've never done, and I'm about to get the most money I've ever gotten doing it. And so I think we will see a hungry, motivated Tyron Woodley. He is going to be in an element he hasn't been in, which is boxing. He is going to have to face some different challenges, conditioning-wise, shorter rounds, but more rounds. So these are all new elements for him. But in a weird way, again, that's going to add some excitement. It's not monotonous. It's not tedious. It's not something he's just used to doing, going through the motions. This is a new element. And typically when you're in a new element, that's going to light a fire. That's going to add some excitement. So I do think we're going to see a motivated Tyron Woodley. But there's a reason why Jake Paul's a slight favorite on odds. Now, of course, with sports betting and the money line moving. There's a couple of reasons why he may be the favorite, but Jake Paul is younger. Jake Paul is hungrier. Jake Paul actually it reminds me of a young Conor McGregor where, now I'm not saying he's as talented as Conor, don't get me wrong, but Conor had a goal. And when you have a goal that you're so hungry to achieving, it adds another element that you can't describe. You have that it. Like Conor doesn't have that it anymore. He achieved everything. 2-weight world champion, richest athlete on Forbes in this year, like $400 million net worth. He doesn't have that it anymore. And you can say you have it and you could want it, but Marvin Hagler said it's hard to wake up when you're sleeping in silk sheets. It's hard to wake up at 6 in the morning and train and get hit. He's achieved it all. Now, although Jake Paul is incredibly successful, he has money, obviously his YouTube following and then Disney, but he has a goal that he hasn't reached yet. And when you have that adds another element, adds another stat that doesn't exist on the stat sheet. And so when you take that with somebody, like Tyron Woodley's already reached his MMA peak, his combat sports peak. He was a champion. So now this is just a good money fight. It's to shut somebody up that he thinks is ignorant. But is it really going to change his life, win or lose? For Jake, if he wins, he continues this path of him wanting to be a professional boxer that he clearly, like I said, we do have to take him seriously because he is putting in the work. He is training. This is something that he does want to do. And like I said, it's giving him a platform to speak on things like fighters pay. And the more he wins, the bigger his platform gets. And he understands that. He's really good at marketing himself. And he embraces the villain role. So Jake Paul has those elements. Like I said, younger, hungrier, and he actually does have some boxing skills. Like he's developed the fundamentals. The 1-2 is his go-to, and obviously it's been working. But we have to look at what he brings to the table. And I'm not saying he's Canelo, and I'm not saying that we've really seen enough because we haven't. We've seen him box an NBA player, Nate Robinson, who didn't belong to be in there. And we've seen him box, granted, an Olympic wrestler, a competitor, a really good mixed martial artist until, obviously, the back nine of his career, he went to the UFC, and we think of the embarrassing moments with Jorge Masvidal. He got tapped out by Damian Maia and Ben Askren. But Ben Askren was never a striker. He was a way below average striker. He was not a boxer. He didn't throw kicks. We didn't think about his Muay Thai. We didn't think about his kickboxing, his movements, nothing. We just know how elite he is with his wrestling and his base on the ground. So when you take that guy who was going to get a big payday, looked like he didn't take it seriously, already never had a boxing fight, wasn't even a striker in MMA, and even though he's a decorated mixed martial artist, a decorated wrestler, you're putting him in the boxing ring. And he got destroyed. And Jake Paul clearly was the better boxer. Even if he wouldn't have knocked him out right away, he was the better boxer. He is now boxing someone who is an athlete, that's taking him seriously, that does have that spark under him because Ben Askren is good friends with Tyron Woodley. So he just saw his friend lose. He sees all the hype that Jake Paul is getting. So he understands, okay, I got to take this guy seriously, and that's the key for Tyron Woodley. And I think he is taking Jake Paul seriously. But this is a new element for Tyron Woodley, and this is an element that Jake Paul is getting familiar with. He's active with. Granted, like I said, those two people have their flaws on who they are as boxers. But Jake Paul's been active. And like I said, he's younger, and he's hungrier. So this fight, even though a lot of people think Tyron Woodley may just knock him out, and that may just happen, I think we need to give Jake Paul the proper respect that's due because of those type of factors going into this fight. So when you look at the macro thing, the macro landscape, this is good for boxing. When you break down the fight individually, I think it's actually a lot more interesting than people are giving it credit for. And I think a lot of people see the Tyron Woodley name, they see the UFC belt, and they think it's just going to be a cakewalk, and I don't think so. I'm not making my official prediction yet, but I won't be surprised if Jake Paul wins this fight. I'm not trying to play, no matter what, I'm right, but Tyron Woodley I could see winning. But my whole point in this spiel is it's not a one-way streak. It's not, I don't see just, there's no way for Jake Paul to win, because I really do think Jake Paul has a great opportunity to win this fight. And I think the more he wins, the more it's actually helping boxing. I really do. And like I said, I know that's not a popular take. I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's the truth. And I think you take a traditional sport and adding a new perspective new way of doing things is actually healthy for the state of boxing. I want to transition to this lastly, and that's Conor McGregor. We saw the Dustin Poirier fight. He breaks his leg. He was losing that fight. And the first round, he's an early starter. And the critique is he gets tired. You don't want him to go in the later rounds. The fact that he was losing that first round is not a good sign, and he was going to lose that fight. Of course, anything can happen, but odds are he was going to lose that fight. He's probably going to get finished the next round or the third round. Dustin Poirier was going to win that fight. He doesn't have the proper people telling him the right things. And I say that because typically that's what a coach is for, is to tell you what you don't want to hear, what you need to get better at, to be in your corner. Hey, you lost that round. You need to go in. Now, there's different coaching methods. I've seen a couple coaches just completely lie and say, go get him, champ. You did good. And then maybe because they understand their fighter, they need to hear that in order to feel motivation. They'll get distraught. They'll get down on themselves if they've heard that they just lost that round. So I understand that aspect of it. But Conor is going down a very dangerous path. And it's a little bit, it's sad, but it's also very unfortunate because I don't see any type of self-reflection. It almost seems like he's a little delirious. And I understand he's a very confident person, and that's the key to his success is he has to believe in yourself before anyone. I understand that. But he keeps coming back saying he's better than ever, and we keep making excuses for his actions. Oh, he was preparing for a boxing fight. Well, whose fault is that? Whose fault? You're coming back to MMA. Whose fault is that you were preparing for Pacquiao? And clearly, it didn't matter. You were going to lose the second one. We saw him with the Khabib. He wasn't in the right state of mind. He barely trained. Whose fault is that? You're a professional athlete. Your job, you have to be prepared. Whose fault is that? So when I look at all these different excuses and I look at the history and for what it is, and you look at the results, we're never going to get that Conor. And it's unfortunate because I know a lot of fight fans are fight fans because of Conor McGregor. We can obviously pay respect and admire and really just appreciate what he's done for the sport, his history, and he was one of the best to ever do it at his peak, but he's no longer at that level. I think he could be a good, talented fighter. He can get a couple wins here and there because off of his pure talent and power, but he's not going to be the best anymore. He's not going to be the best. He's not going to beat a Dustin Poirier if they were to fight a fourth time. He's not going to beat a Khabib. Look what Khabib did to Dustin, and Dustin's whooping Conor. And obviously styles make matchups, but he's not fighting frequently. Reminds me of John Jones. And John Jones never lost because he's always gotten it done in the octagon. He's always gotten it done. Say what you want about John. He's always gotten it done. But outside of the octagon, there's just always something there that just doesn't make sense. The accountability, there's a distraction, and that's the road that Conor's going down. And just the fact that his coaches are saying that we felt great going. I don't feel that there's accountability in that circle. And I'm not saying that Coach John Kavanaugh doesn't know how to coach. I think he's a great coach. I'm just saying within that, they know Conor better than us. So maybe they just understand that's what Conor needs. But given the recent events, I don't think that's what he needs. And I think that we're reaching a point where Conor, he's famous. He's always going to sell fights, but he's losing his aura, or he has lost his aura because when's the last time he won? And it was special when he was winning and talking trash because he was predicting it and he did it and he backed it up, and now he's not. And so when you talk trash and you're not backing it up, it's just a bad look. And you'd think that there would be a accountability mirror. You look in the mirror. Okay, something's not going on that I'm saying that is working, and it's just not. And we're not seeing that. And that's why I think this is the end of the Conor era. And I think it's over. And I was due for a combat sports episode, so I'm glad I was able to get that one in. Please download, rate, and subscribe on any podcast platform. My YouTube channel, Max Van Auken. My name is my brand, Instagram, Twitter. And there will be some big guests lined up for the end of this week, the following week, and going forward. So very excited on what's ahead. I appreciate you guys for listening as always. Until next time, peace.